In today's Gospel, we read about Jesus attending the Feast of Tabernacles, and it can be very easy to mistake this reference to the Feast of Tabernacles as something minor or inconsequential. But in actual fact, this feast points us in a very important and powerful way to the work that Christ has come to accomplish here on earth. First of all, the Feast of Tabernacles was about commemorating the period of exile that the Jewish people spent, the 40 years of exile they spent in the desert, waiting for entrance to the promised land. Of course, this points us to Christ because Christ comes to open up the gate to the new promised land, the promised land of heaven. It is through his death on the cross and resurrection that that path is now open to us. After the time of exile, the Feast of Tabernacles became known as the ingathering, and it was about celebrating the end of the harvest, the bringing in of the harvest. And obviously, one harvest comes to a close, another new harvest begins. And this is exactly what Christ has come to accomplish here on earth. He has come to bring an end to the old covenant, and he has come to open up the new one. One harvest comes to an end, a new harvest begins. The other thing was that this was also a celebration of the end of the year for the Jewish people and the end of the cycle of readings from the Torah, just as it is with Christ, who has come to fulfill the law. So the Torah is fulfilled at the end, or the Torah obligations are fulfilled at the end of each year. So Christ comes to fulfill the law, and the old covenant again comes to a close, and the new covenant is opened through Christ. The other thing about the Feast of Tabernacles was that it was a celebration of God's provision and care for his people. Of course, we see that played out in today's gospel, where there are various parties that actually want to kill Jesus, but we are told at both the beginning and the end of today's gospel readings that they are prevented from doing this. Because as the end of the gospel tells us, God's plan is playing out here. It is not his time. So we see God's provision, God's protecting hand at work, despite the plans and the machinations of those who wish to do harm. And then lastly, the Feast of Tabernacles was one of the things that was a big hallmark of that feast were acts of charity and self-giving. This points us to Christ because Christ is about to participate in the ultimate act of self-giving love. He is about to go freely to the cross. He is about to give of himself over to a painful and brutal and torturous death out of love for each and every one of us. So today, the mention of the Feast of Tabernacles is not at all inconsequential or passing. Instead, it points us to the very heart of Christ's work here on earth. Today's saint quote of the day comes from Saint Teresa of Avila, and she said this: "Blessed be he who came into the world for no other purpose than to suffer." During this period of Lent, as we spend a more intense time of focus honed in on the life and the ministry of Christ, it's really important to remember that the cross is the pinnacle moment of this season. The cross, that Good Friday where Christ willingly goes to this brutal and torturous death out of love for each and every one of us. He isn't just a Messiah who is barking out divine moral edicts. He is a Messiah who becomes one of us and who goes to the cross out of love. And he gives or creates a debt that we can never ever hope to repay. So at this time of Lent, let us focus more intensely on the blessing that it is that Christ came, that Christ died, and that Christ rose from the dead for our sake.